Now, let's talk about passive FTP. Like what we did from the previous video, active FTP, we are going to add the client, the switch, and the server in our topology. There. Okay. So, our FTP is still listening on port 21, but the data transfer will have a different process. And this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to use the same IP addresses. So 10.0.0.101. Okay. And the server, like what I mentioned, we're still going to use the same port 10.0.0.200. And this FTP server will be listening on port 21. Now in our client, let's say we will be using the same port as well, 2001. Now this port, we'll get this port when the client initialize FTP connection. This time, this is what we call the FTP PASV, the FTP passive connection. And there's no real difference from the client to server initialization. The server will still send back an acknowledgement, okay, saying that yes, you can connect to my control connection. Or sometimes it is called command channels. All right. Now, when the client requests data over the control connection, it will have a different approach. The client is the one who will initiate the data transfer to the server. So in this case, it will initiate a data transfer. You see, from the active FTP, it's actually the server who will initiate the data transfer back to the client. Now, in this case, the client will have a new port. Let's say this is port 2000. It was changed from the control connection to data connection using now a different port 2002. And for the server, obviously we'll use the same IP address, but you're gonna use a different port from port 21. It will use a random port. It's like an ephemeral port, but this is used by the FTP server. And let's say this is port 3000. There you go. Okay, so we have port 2002 on the client side and port 3001, port 3000 on the server side. Okay, and the server will send and acknowledge. Now, this is actually the main difference versus FTP or active FTP versus passive FTP, where this part here, FTP, where this port here are the data ports or ports used in our data transfer. And this process is not the control connection, it's not the command channel, this is the data transfer. Right? Again, there's a difference. On the command channel / the control connection, this is when the client sends commands such as ls, get, etc. Now, on the data transfer side, this is when the client will send or receive data or files. Now, the difference mainly by the active FTP versus this passive FTP is more on the security appliance running in between. Let's say this is not just a switch. Let's say this is a firewall or other security appliance. You know what's gonna happen or what's gonna be the problem? Okay, so you see this port here. This is a random port, right? Random port. Now, here is the problem. This is often blocked by this firewall. And why? Because it doesn't know, in this example, this port 3000.